Careful. Tony, nice to meet you. Okay. What's your last name? Real soon. 3 years. Me too. Will be my 3 years like that here. Yeah. Are you guys like Martinez? Too bad he's pretty much. I mean, he does shoot shows, but he's not so much. Yeah. 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 Okay, yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's what we keep losing. Oh, okay. I don't know, but I like mine. It's looking good. It's like 3 officers.
Hi, we're about to get started, so I'm just going to move a couple of these mics a little bit so I can get some paperwork here. Everybody good with sound?
Yep, we did a mic check.
Okay. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, Chief, do you want to come right up here? My name's Officer Jonna Watson. I'm one of the public information officers for the Oakland Police Department. I'd like to thank media for attending today's press conference. Oakland Police Chief Laron L. Armstrong will be discussing the independent investigation findings and results in connection to 2020 George Floyd protests. These dates will cover May 29th, May 30th, May 31st, and June 1st. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Oakland Police Chief Laron L. Armstrong. Chief?
First, I'd like to say thank you all for being here. I think today is really important. I said on day one, when I took this job, that I would be transparent, that I would hold our department accountable. And today I'll be making some announcements. First of all, I want to say that you don't want to be in a position where you have to respond to such a tragic incident like the death of George Floyd. And so we as law enforcement recognize the call of today, the call for reform and the call for change. But when we talk about what happened last year as a result of the death of George Floyd and what happened here in the city of Oakland, from May 29th through June 1st, 2020, the city of Oakland faced 4 days of gatherings, most of which were peaceful. But we also had protests that were related, that became violent, that became challenging for the department and for the city. First of all, I want to say that our officers did a phenomenal job over a 4-day period. If you think about 3 days of some of the most violent protests that I've seen in my over 22 years of being a member of this department, the idea that you would face officers being targeted, violence, including rocks and bottles being thrown at officers, and even the death of the federal officer Underwood. It was a challenging night, starting off with May 29th. But our officers did their best to address these issues, and we thoroughly evaluated this. All 4 days were evaluated through an independent review process. 4 independent reviews. The first of which was the Oakland Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. They did a thorough investigation of all use of force and misconduct related to all 4 days. The second was our CPRA. They did a complete review of all of the 4 days of use of force and misconduct allegations. We also had an independent contractor, Rick Brazil, conduct an independent investigation of all 4 days. We then took the proactive approach to creating a force review board, the highest level of review within the Oakland Police Department, to look at every single use of force from over this 4-day period. May 29th presented some significant challenges around violence. Violence towards officers, community unrest, vandalism, and destruction. Our officers managed that day with using force. We had to deploy tear gas that day. Each event was evaluated, and all use of force was found to be in compliance with department policy. There was one sustained finding for May 29th. May 30th, the department was presented with different challenges. Those challenges included 2 different operations. One in which we had a small crowd, a peaceful gathering is what it started off as. It at some points became violent. Minimal force was used for that night event, but we also had to provide support to the city of Emeryville that experienced a significant amount of vandalism along the Emery Bay corridor. The looting of Best Buy, Target, Home Depot, and all of the shops in the Emery Bay Plaza presented a challenge for Emeryville. We provided support. But there also was an incident where an individual shot at one of our officers. The officer was not injured. We responded, and we took that person into custody and recovered the firearm. There were no sustained findings for May 30th. All use of force was reviewed. All 4 investigations came to the conclusion there was no sustained findings. Next was May 31st. May 31st presented challenges that we hadn't seen in the city of Oakland related to protests. It was a violent crime caravan. Caravans of vehicles that came to the city of Oakland with the intention of looting businesses throughout our city, armed with firearms. These businesses included Walgreens, other pharmacies in our city, medical marijuana dispensaries, as well as small businesses in our most marginalized communities, like the Fruitvale area, where some of our small business owners sustained significant loss. It also went into our Foothill Plaza, where we also have small businesses. The city was impacted in a way in which we hadn't dealt with before. We responded to those events. We addressed those events. We had uses of force. We evaluated each one of those uses of force, and there was one sustained finding for the 31st. June 1st. This was a day that started off with a gathering at Oakland Tech, a peaceful gathering led by youth. Youth started at Oakland Tech and they marched down to Frank Ogawa Plaza. The crowd numbers reached as high as 15,000. This was a peaceful gathering made up of students that gave speeches and spoke about the injustice that they seen related to the George Floyd murder. My daughter was even at that event. And so I know that that was made up of families and community members and seniors. But when that group left the area and concluded their event, a smaller group walked down Broadway protesting, and they made it to 8th and Broadway. When they made it to 8th and Broadway, where officers already had barriers to stop them from reaching the PAB, a couple of bottles were thrown towards officers, and officers responded by deploying tear gas. That was thoroughly evaluated by the department and our Force Review Board, and as a result of that, there were 33 sustained findings. I want to be clear that this was not a policy failure. Officers deployed tear gas outside of policy. Policy is very clear that in order to use that level of force, there must be imminent danger to the officer or a community member. During these investigative processes, they determined that that did not exist. These were 4 difficult days, 4 exhausting days. And I'll say that the department owns some level of ownership, that with limited resources, it forces you to use the same officers for each operation. That is challenging. It's challenging for the officers, it's challenging for the department, but also it poses a potential for poor decisions to be made. But even with that standing, the policy is very clear. Officers were not authorized to use gas in the manner in which they did, and for that, the department has held them accountable. I told you from day one that we were going to take a critical look at things, and we were going to be honest about our actions. In this case, that's what we are doing today, is that officers have been held accountable, from written reprimands up to several suspensions. And so I say to you today also, one of the things that is important, some lessons learned, is that we didn't wait to make improvements. We have had hundreds of hours of additional training in crowd control and crowd management for supervisors and senior managers as well. We've trained our officers that are authorized to deploy gas on the proper use of gas. We've also made our teams smaller gas deployment teams. We've also removed supervisors from being able to deploy gas. They can no longer deploy gas. They are supervisors, and they will supervise the deployment of gas. Our command staff will have to approve the removal of gas even into the field. It will no longer be able to be carried into the field without command approval. Not removed from the vehicle at all until it's approved. We are going to have strict requirements around when these type of munitions can be used. It's my effort to ensure the community, as they come to Oakland, that they can peacefully assemble, that if they peacefully march or protest in our city, that they don't have to worry about deployments outside of policy. We are fixing that. That's already begun, and clear accountability will happen if those that violate policy. I also must apologize to our community. After the events from June 1st, I was provided information that Molotov cocktails as well as youth and seniors were not in attendance. That information came directly off a department radio during the event. And we communicated that during a press conference. I did. But I was soon advised by young people, by people in the community who shared video with me, who sent me emails and said, at the time, Deputy Chief, there were youth there and there were seniors there, and we want you to look at this. And I looked at it, and I had to go and retract my statement. And I went before the police commission and apologized for misrepresenting what actually occurred out there. And I say again today, I apologize for that. We recognize that as a department, we need to make sure before we push out information that we take the time to actually vet that information, make sure that it's accurate. And so moving forward, my directive to my staff is that although officers may say that they see things or experience things, before we release it to the media, we must vet that information first through actual evidence, whether it's video or some other written document. And the last thing I will address is our mutual aid response. One of the things that we had significant concern about was when we request mutual aid, is the department managing that mutual aid properly? So we had some failures in our mutual aid deployment practices. We needed to retrain command staff about how we work closely with mutual aid, and that's already been done. We have retrained our command staff. Second thing is pushing forward new mandates around what role mutual aid can play when they are requested into the city of Oakland to assist. That if the first responsibility for mutual aid moving forward would be to protect vital facilities. That includes City Hall, the police administration building, the Eastmont substation, and other critical infrastructures. That's the first assignment. Non-protest related assignments. If it is a full-blown riot and officers are facing potential safety risks, then we will determine if they need to be deployed into the field. The second thing we'll make sure that is done is that we will ensure that they understand the policies of the Oakland Police Department. The mandate moving forward per policy is that when they come to Oakland as a mutual aid agency, that they are provided a copy of the policy, taken through the policy, and clearly made aware of munitions that are not allowed in the city of Oakland. And moving forward, that will happen. That was a failure on behalf of the department during this operation, one in which we've already begun to correct. And so, just lastly, want to reassure the community that this is a priority for me. Oakland is a city built on social justice, that when things happen across this country, you can expect that there will be a response in the city of Oakland. And Oakland Police Department has done a phenomenal job over many years managing crowd control events. But out of 4 days, 4 very difficult days, 4 days where officers face significant violence, there was a failure on June 1st. And for that, we are holding ourselves accountable. It starts with me. I will ensure moving forward that there is a strong plan, that there is strong supervisor and command control, and that we are minimizing the use of force. And with that, I'll take questions.
Chief, are we all, when you're talking about the 33 sustained allegations on June 1st, those are violations by officers in your department? And are we talking about strictly tear gas, or are we talking about other uses of force? For instance, projectiles that we've seen used in years past where people were injured. Are we talking about, physical force? What are we talking about?
Yes, so none of those included any outside agencies. The department during this event did not deploy any munitions in terms of rubber bullets. We don't have rubber bullets in our inventory here at Oakland, so that wasn't something that we were managing. The vast majority of what the sustained complaints were the deployment of tear gas outside of policy. We had some other performance of duty issues, but June 1st represented the vast majority of the sustained complaints that we're talking about today. We had one sustained on May 29th. That was more of a performance of duty issue. One sustained on the 31st, again, which was another performance of duty related issue. But the remainder was mainly related to June 1st events.
Can you say specifically how many officers have been disciplined? How many got the written reprimand versus, say, a suspension?
No, I can't go into any specific details. I think what's important to understand is that officers still have a right to due process. And I think when we're talking about accountability, I think it's important that departments don't do anything to make it more difficult for us to uphold discipline. And so it's just as important when you hold people accountable that discipline actually is upheld. They have due process. Obviously, they may challenge the discipline, but I don't want to do anything to compromise that process. And so I want to limit how much I speak specifically about their disciplinary process.
You don't want us to think that 33 sustained is 33 officers. Or do you?
I think there are officers with multiple sustains. It is not 33 officers. I'll say that.
David, I know you have a question.
Yeah, that's a question I have. So it's not 35 officers. Multiple officers have multiple.
Yes, some officers have multiple
And
sustains.
in the rank of officers, are these all officers, sergeants, command staff?
Yeah, this it ranged from officer all the way up to senior command staff,
Meaning what rank?
all the way up to the rank of deputy chief.
Sorry, sir, is there a number of officers, or are you releasing that
I will release the number of officers during the draft that I present before Police Commission. So one of the things that I think is critical is that I recognize that this department has civilian oversight. And I think it's appropriate for me as the chief to bring forth my after action report to the Police Commission and take direct questions from Police Commission, and we'll do that at the next Police Commission meeting where I'll be presenting my after action report.
Go ahead, Evan.
Were you disciplined, Chief?
I was not.
Also,
just-
hold on one second, I want us to be mindful that we have laws that are structured around what information we can release, so
Sure.
I do want to be sensitive to
Yeah.
that as well.
With suspension, can you describe what the suspension means?
It clearly means that officers will be suspended for duty from the time period that they were suspended for. I can't go into specific how many days each officer may have gotten, but officers will be suspended from duty. Or I won't be. I don't want to say I can't be, but I won't be going into.
Just to clarify, how many level 1 use of force complaints were investigated by IA, and how many level 1 use of force complaints were sustained by IA?
Yeah, I think it's more nuanced. So maybe we can take that offline and get you that data, because it's sort of we reviewed close to 300 overall uses of force, and they have multiple levels. And so even the gas deployment is a level 3 use of force, which a level 3 use of force typically would not be reviewed in a force review board. But I made a determination that we would be reviewing it at the highest level, and that's why we had a force review board. And for the first time, it actually included 2 deputy chiefs. So we did it at a really high level to ensure that we were taking a critical look at all of these gas deployments, because we understand, the sensitive nature of young people that were involved in this gathering, and that we wanted to make sure that our officers were complying with policy, and I think that's what led us to this outcome.
Have the officers had their discipline? Have they served their suspension, sample, or gotten a written reprimand?
I won't go into specifics, but officers have been served their discipline. I won't say if
Served
they
their discipline. That doesn't mean
served mean they've been notified of their discipline.
And they can still appeal some of those.
Yes, they have due process.
That's happening now.
Yes.
I think we'll go ahead.
Sorry,
Yeah,
yes, but
others
it's
go ahead.
a bit on a different topic. So yesterday.
So hold on one second. Hold on one second. We want to finish up with this particular topic. Anything off of this topic, we'll go ahead and take it offline. Okay? Is that fair? Darwin?
Just one more clarification on use of force. So there's multiple levels,
Yeah.
level 1, level 2, level 3,
Mhm.
level 4,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Can you describe, of course not specific to any of the incidents that occurred that day, but just in a general sense, what might have been a level 4 use of force that was reviewed? You said gas was a 3.
Mhm.
What was a 2?
Yeah, a 2 would be something that led to some type of injury or use of an impact weapon. That would be a level 2. Obviously, a level 1 would be an officer-involved shooting or something that would be the most serious use of force. Level 3 would be the gas deployment, the use of munitions, as well as potentially a taser or a takedown to the ground. Things like that would fall into the level 3. And then a level 4 would be what we call sort of de minimis force, where grabbing, pulling, things of that nature, that is really reviewed at the supervisor level.
And anyone who was out there that night knows that it was pretty crazy. There was a lot of stuff going on. Can you give a high-level summary? How many officers sustained injuries in your department?
Yeah, very important question. Over the 4-day period, I believe it was 33 officers sustained injuries. 33 first responders, 21 officers. So that included first responders, included some firefighters and EMT that was injured as well during the 4-day events. Vast majority of those injuries did occur on Friday the 29th, which was the most violent night, where we seen an officer actually be hit with a Molotov cocktail instead of fire. We know that we also had officers that were hit with bricks and things of that nature. So significant injuries over the weekend. I think we can't lose sight of the human side of this, right? That if officers experience this level of violence over a 2 to 3 day period, it could, impact their decision making on day 4. And so that is some of the areas that we need to improve at the top level, at my level, of how we can be better when it comes to deciding what staff should be deployed at a particular event, how many days have they been into the field, how many incidents have they been involved in. These are things that we need to be mindful of as we deploy officers.
We've got a question about it.
On the bad information that was passed on, is there any effort to go back and track it down, figure out where it came from, what the source of it was, and how it led you to tell it?
Yeah, we went back. We identified the officer that actually brought that information forward. I think it's all about, the officer's perception. I think, in the heat of what's happening out there, officers perceive certain things that they've experienced over a couple of days, right? That you had seen Molotov cocktails. And so the assumption that a bottle being thrown containing a liquid could lead one to believe that that's what they're about to face again. In this case, when you review these things, we have to look at them based on the evidence that's presented before us. And not that the officer was intentionally being untruthful, simply from their viewpoint, they're trying to provide what we call situational awareness, trying to make sure that whatever they're facing is captured on radio so we can memorialize that information. But I think from our standpoint of messaging, we need to vet it before we push it out publicly. We always want to be transparent with the media in our effort to try to share as much information as we can with you guys. We also have to be cognizant of that. That information has to be vetted, because I think clearly in this case, community members had a different perspective, had other additional information that was also critical as well.
Just to clarify, was that an Oakland officer or a mutual aid officer?
It was an Oakland officer.
I think we're going to conclude this. Any other topics? We're going to clear this room, and then we'll do answer your question. Okay?
Yeah, can I just wrap up with this?
Yes, sir.
My officers faced tremendous challenges over a 4-day period. I want to be clear. To manage the things that they managed over 4 days was extremely was an extreme feat for all of us. It was the most difficult circumstances that we've all faced over our long careers, and so I think for 3 days we did a really good job. I think they handled these things. They responded. We had no significant injuries to community members as a result of our force, and so all in all, I thought officers did a good job. I will say clearly that June 1st was a failure. There was issues there, and we've learned from them. Tough lessons that this department had to learn. But as a result, I think we're better. We're a better department. I just want our community to know that you should feel safe coming to the city of Oakland. You should feel safe peacefully gathering in the city of Oakland. And the Oakland Police Department will manage these gatherings in a way that's consistent with policy, one in which people can feel confident that you will not face force in the city of Oakland just because you come here to exercise your First Amendment rights. I want to assure that, okay?